This party wasn't supposed to unfold as anticipated. When Sarah suggested the gathering initially, it didn't raise any red flags. Our marriage spanned a period long enough for me to grasp her regular patterns. Typically, it involved an evening with Tara and their group, some drinks, perhaps dancing, nothing out of the ordinary. However, this event seemed distinct. It could have been her casual mention or the fact that Tara was known for organizing parties where boundaries blurred. I tried to dismiss my suspicions, but instinctively I couldn't shake them off. I had grown accustomed to reading her subtle signs, her recent distraction, the long, unexplained nights. We'd quarreled about such matters in the past. But this time, it wasn't solely about annoyance or envy on my part. This time, it felt like something was at risk, something significant. The night preceding the party, I voiced my concerns to her. "I believe you shouldn't attend." "You're not acting rational, Sarah. Lately, I've been uncertain. It seems we've drifted apart somehow." I didn't anticipate her responding in that manner. She retorted angrily, calling me paranoid. "Just a party," she said, her eyes hardening. "Why do you always do this?" That statement stung more than expected. She implied that I was consistently monitoring her and questioning her every move. Yet, that's not true. I've been giving her room to breathe, allowing her to live freely while trusting our bond would endure any temptations. However, recently you've become aloof, both emotionally and physically. We still share the same living space, but it feels like you're slipping away from me. "I'm not trying to dictate your actions," I said, struggling to keep composed. "I'm merely expressing my feelings. There's something about this party that feels strange. It unsettles me." She disregarded my concerns as trivial insecurities, implying I was overreacting about a simple night out. However, it wasn't merely a night out. It symbolized the accumulated issues from recent months, the distance, late nights with unclear explanations, and her seeming absence during our shared moments. I sensed our relationship slipping away bit by bit, and this party seemed like a critical juncture. Yet, instead of pursuing the matter further, I let her depart. Perhaps I was weary of contending, weary of feeling like I was constantly reeling us, and while she grew increasingly detached. When she left that evening, I didn't attempt to hold her back. Instead, I found myself restless. As time passed, I was wandering around the house, my thoughts chaotic with things I wished not to consider. The quiet was oppressive. By midnight, no communication from her had arrived, neither call nor text, only the chilly solitude of our empty home. I made a choice, one that would alter everything. I snatched my phone, activated the tracking app we installed months earlier when she frequently lost her device, and I trailed her. It felt wrong, intrusive even, but in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know where she was, what she was doing, and I had to uncover the truth, no matter how gruesome it might be. The app displayed her location. I anticipated seeing her at Tara's house or a nearby bar. Instead, it revealed something that made my stomach plummet. A motel on the outskirts of town. I scrutinized the screen, trying to grasp it. A motel? What on earth was she doing there? My heart pounded, anger and apprehension growing within me. This wasn't a simple gathering. Something else was transpiring. Unacknowledged suspicion gripping me, I instinctively grabbed my keys and made for the door. The journey to the motel seemed interminable, though it was likely just 20 minutes. My fingers clenched the steering wheel so hard that they turned pale with whiteness. I could hear my pulse throbbing in my ears, growing louder with each mile passed. Constantly checking my phone's map, tracking Sarah's location. Still at the motel, unmoved. I considered turning back, dismissing what I had seen. A part of me wished it was a misunderstanding, that she was there for some innocuous reason, and I was merely overreacting. But deep within, I knew the growing distance between us over the past few months wasn't all imagined. It wasn't just stress or work. It was something deeper, something ominous. As I parked in the lot, I ensured to park a bit away from the building, avoiding notice. Few vehicles occupied the area, none familiar. For a fleeting instant, I remained stationary, clutching the steering wheel, fixated on the Westmore Motel sign, its neon characters emitting a faint hum in the darkness of the night. The establishment appeared run down, a place where individuals sought anonymity. Affordable and clandestine, it was ideal for furtive activities or hidden matters. I reopened the app, my thumb poised over the display as though awaiting new information. Yet the tiny dot remained stationary. She was still inside one of the rooms. The room number wasn't indicated, but I could narrow down the options. I exited the vehicle and traversed the parking lot, striving to control my breathing, suppressing fears of the worst-case scenario. The chilly night air failed to soothe my agitation. My thoughts spiraled through a litany of dire possibilities, vivid mental snapshots emerging. Sarah in a room with another person, laughing, grinning, engaging in activities she hadn't shared with me in months. I passed several rooms, each door labeled with a worn number. 201, 202, 203. As I approached the last few rooms, my heart thumped in my chest. I paused at the final ones, scanning the parking lot, then spotted her car parked secluded at the end, as if she didn't want it noticed. That was enough confirmation. Standing there for a moment, I stared at her vehicle, the truth hitting me. There was no more denying, no more justifying. She was in the motel, and I had no valid explanation for that fact. The trust we held crumbled, replaced by something I didn't want to admit. I advanced towards the nearest door, my fists balled at my sides. Room 214, the blinds were drawn, a faint light seeping from the edges. I hesitated, my breath shallow. Was I truly eager to know? Did I really wish to see what lay beyond that door? Yes, I needed to. I raised my hand to knock, but halted mere inches away. Instead, I placed my ear against it, listening. Initially, there was nothing but quietness. Then I heard faint, soft laughter, hers, accompanied by a muted man's voice that stirred up fury within me. Without needing to hear more details, I pounded on the door forcefully. The voices inside halted abruptly, replaced by movement, shuffling, hushed conversations, and signs of fear. My thoughts raced, my body trembled with adrenaline. I knocked again, this time louder. "Sarah, open the door," I bellowed, my voice strained with anger. For a brief moment, there was only silence. Then, the door slowly opened enough for me to see her face. She looked pale and astonished, as if she couldn't believe I was standing before her. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, suggesting she had been interrupted mid-action, unable to find a plausible excuse. "What on earth are you doing here?" she spat out angrily, her voice low, scanning the area cautiously as if expecting someone else to be watching. I paid no heed to the spectacle. "Why are you here?" I retorted, forcing the door open further. The room was now visible, a bed with wrinkled sheets and a man sitting on the edge, looking just as astonished. He was a stranger to me, exactly as I had feared. Sarah emerged, closing the door behind her, attempting to shield my view. "This isn't what it seems," she said, her voice trembling, but her eyes gave her away. She was frantically trying to regain control of the situation. I scoffed, my laughter biting and cold. "Isn't it? Because from where I stand, it appears exactly as it is." I couldn't believe this was transpiring, couldn't believe how effortlessly she had deceived me. After so much, after all the opportunities I had granted her, she was here engaging in this. She reached out, attempting to grab my arm. "Let me clarify," she begged, her voice shaking, but I moved away, repulsed. "Clarify? Clarify what, Sarah? You're here at a motel." "With you?" I asked sharply, my words heavy with the impact of her deceit. She tried to speak, but remained silent, unable to weave her lies this time. It was then that I knew it was all over. There was nothing left to restore. Our connection, everything I had cherished, lay in ruins. Sarah let her hand fall limply by her side, her expression changing from shock to something more guarded, as if she were already plotting her next strategy. The man within remained hidden. He stayed seated, perhaps hoping I'd simply depart, too timid to confront the destruction he'd aided in creating. "This isn't what you think," Sarah said, her voice calmer now, as if trying to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. I had already witnessed too much. "Could we possibly discuss this elsewhere?" I shook my head, filled with disbelief and rage. "Discuss? What is there left to discuss about you, Sarah? Is there anything at all?" "You find yourself standing before a motel room, accompanied by another man. My anxiety had been escalating, fearing that something amiss was happening between us. And there you are, inadvertently confirming my suspicions. She glanced behind at the door, her eyes darting to the individual within, then back to me. Her countenance betrayed her distress as she tried to devise a way to make this seem less than what it was. It's not as you think. Things have been strained between us for some time now, and I didn't know how to navigate it. I came here to collect my thoughts. I interjected, my voice escalating. Clear your thoughts. Is that the term you use for this? I don't require your justifications, Sarah, I continued. You've been discovered. Don't deceive me by presenting this as something other than what it is. She moved toward me, attempting to smooth things over, seemingly believing she could still alter the situation. I apologize. Accept it. I acknowledge my mistake, but let's go somewhere and discuss this. We can find a solution. How could I solve this dilemma when the one I considered a friend had been deceiving me for months? The words reverberated in my mind, empty and without meaning. There seemed to be nothing left to uncover since she had decided her actions long ago. Her step into that room marked her choice. She no longer cared about us then, nor does she now. I took a step back, widening the gap between us. No, Sarah, you don't understand. It's over. There's nothing more to unravel. You made your choice, I said, feeling heavy with months of holding our crumbling bond on my shoulders alone. Was it worth it? I queried softly, not from rage but fatigue. I felt spent, drained from carrying the weight of our failing relationship single-handedly. Was it worth tearing down everything we had built? Because I am no longer willing to fight for someone who has already abandoned me. For a brief moment, she remained silent. Her gaze fell to the ground, her mask slipping enough for me to discern the remorse beneath. However, her regret was not for me. It was self-inflicted. She felt sorry for being caught, not for hurting me. She wasn't happy with how things turned out. I didn't intend for this to transpire, she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. I found it hard to believe. This had gone too far, Sarah. You've been deceiving me for months, vanishing and coming up with excuses. While I was sitting at home, feeling foolish, you were carrying on without me. And now you claim that you didn't mean for things to escalate this much? That's all you have to say. She looked at me imploringly, her eyes beseeching. Please, let's not end here. We can rectify this. I'll terminate it with him, I promise. I'll put things right. I chuckled, but it wasn't a jovial laugh. It was the laughter of someone who had reached their limit, who recognized that the situation had become untenable. Terminate it with him? It's over already, Sarah. The moment you chose to deceive, the moment you picked someone else over us, it was finished. You don't get to make amends now. Tears welled up then. Regardless of truth or deception, I could not discern any more. She remained, dabbing at her eyes, attempting to convey remorse, yet futilely so. The harm had been inflicted, and no number of tears could undo it. A feeling of frigid, vacant resignation overtook me. You must depart, I whispered, the rage transformed by exhaustion. Return within, carry on as you will, but do not return home. We're through. She resisted, fear washing over her visage once more. Don't utter those words. Don't cast us aside like this. Cast us aside, I echoed, a final surge of anger coursing through me. You have done that already. I am merely completing your work. I departed, each step burdening me, yet each one more decisive than the last. I refused to glance back. I had no wish to witness the regret on her face, nor hear any more of her excuses or pleas. Upon entering my vehicle, the weight of the situation struck me. It was over. Decades of matrimony, affection, faithfulness, all vanished in a solitary night. Departing from the motel, a sense of relief washed over me, unexpected and welcome. For months, I'd been struggling under an unbearable burden, attempting to mend what was irrevocably damaged. Now, at least, the truth had surfaced, ending our long-standing struggle. The Sarah I wedded no longer resided within. Possibly she hadn't been for quite some time. I parked in the driveway, the familiar image of our dwelling failing to provide solace. It appeared unaltered, but it felt altered. This wasn't a home anymore, It was merely a structure, a location where two individuals had gradually drifted apart, feigning the ability to preserve what had ceased to exist long before tonight. I remained in the automobile for several minutes, gazing at the entrance door, aware that upon entering, everything would alter. I lacked the willpower to confront it as yet, neither the recollections nor the silence. Therefore, I merely sat there, replaying the recent months in my mind, scrutinizing each moment where I should have noticed the omens. The prolonged absences without explanation. The manner in which she'd return home and appear normal, despite the growing chasm between us. The instances when I'd endeavor to communicate with her, strive to connect, and she'd retreat, disregarding my apprehensions as if they were baseless assumptions. For how long had she been deceiving me? How long had she concealed this from me? A sense of bitterness welled up inside me, but I suppressed it. Now was not the time for anger. Regrettably, I'd lost her months ago. I was just too obstinate to realize it. Eventually, I compelled myself to leave the car and enter the house. It was as quiet and dark as when she departed that evening. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood in the kitchen, the burden of everything overwhelming me. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. She would return soon, or so I thought. The altercation outside the motel had been intense, yet I knew Sarah well enough to know she wouldn't vanish. She'd attempt to come home, try to clarify, to persuade me that it was all a blunder, that we could mend it. But I was through. I moved towards the fridge, took a beer, and slumped onto the couch, staring at the wall as I drained the bottle. The flavor was bitter, yet inconsequential. It felt like I required something, anything, to pierce through the void that was enveloping me. I recalled the night we initially inhabited this house. We'd been married for 2 years, still basking in the honeymoon phase where everything seemed flawless. I remember how elated Sarah was, how we spent hours unpacking, laughing, discussing our future plans. We had ambitions, grand ambitions. Children, vacations, a life we were going to construct together. That now felt like an eternity ago. All I could ponder was the expression on her face when she'd opened the motel door. The panic, the remorse, but also the deceit. Even with clear evidence against her, she still attempted to distort it, still tried to make it appear as if there was something left to rescue, as if we could simply brush it all under the carpet and continue pretending everything was normal. But there was no going back, not now. The main door creaked open, and I heard her footsteps as she entered the house. She halted in the corridor, uncertain if I remained present. I remained unmoved, silent, merely waiting, beer in hand, fixedly gazing at the wall, aware of the impending confrontation. She entered the living room, her eyes reddened by tears, her complexion ashen. Her transformation was palpable, as though the reality of her actions was only now striking her. However, it mattered not. The harm had already been inflicted. Seating herself on a chair opposite me, she hesitated to approach too near. For a while, we remained motionless in silence, the gap between us seeming insurmountable. "May we discuss this?" she eventually murmured, her voice quivering. Initially, I remained unresponsive. I neither looked at nor spoke to her. I merely took another sip of my beer, drawing out the silence until it became almost unbearable. "What is left to discuss?" I asked softly, my tone icy, disengaged. "You've already said enough." She lowered her gaze, wiping away her tears. "Indeed, it wasn't as it appeared," I chuckled, the sound tinged with bitterness and rawness. "It wasn't as it seemed," I retorted, confronting her. "In a motel room with another man, Sarah, is that correct?" She quivered under my words, tears pooling in her eyes. "How could it be worse? It was a mistake," she implored, her voice trembling. I was terrified, unsure of how to mend the rift between us, and so I made a dreadful decision. "Yet, it's not as you perceive," I finally faced her, my gaze stern. "You were unfaithful, Sarah. You deceived me. And still, you lie even now. Confess. Stop disguising this as something else." She shuddered at my accusations, tears spilling down her cheeks anew. "I'm not lying," she protested, struggling to meet my gaze. "It seems bad, but it was a solitary incident. It had no significance. I was adrift, and I didn't know how to inform you. I didn't know how to cope with everything." I fixed her with a glare, the fury within me resurfacing once more. But it wasn't the furious kind of rage. The chill was profound, settling as it did. It signaled an end, a conclusion that could not be reversed. "It's finished, Sarah," I murmured, placing my beer untouched on the table. "There's no mending this rift. You chose your path. Now bear its consequences." She trembled, her voice growing urgent. "Don't speak so callously. I love you. I can't bear to lose you." I rose and headed towards the hall. "You have already," I said, leaving her behind. From the living room, I heard her weeping, but I paid it no mind. The truth had been spoken, and now it was time to let go. I moved along the hallway to the bedroom, closing the door gently as I went. Sarah's tears faded into the distance, but I ignored them. I settled on the bed's edge, feeling a strange emptiness, a finality that was hard to define. It wasn't the rage or sorrow I had anticipated, but a void that seemed to echo my own loss. This was it, the end. My gaze swept across the shared space, past the framed photographs on the walls, tiny reminders of a life constructed together, snapshots from holidays, wedding day joy, keepsakes of times that once felt flawless. Yet, they seemed unreal now, like peering into someone else's existence, someone else's memories. I fixated on a picture of us from our honeymoon, a distant beach where we'd laughed as if nothing could disturb us. How did it all disintegrate so swiftly? Or perhaps it wasn't swift at all. Perhaps it had been slowly eroding for some time, and I hadn't noticed until it was too late. Maybe Sarah's infidelity was merely the last stone in a coffin we'd been constructing together, brick by brick. A gentle knock on the door penetrated my thoughts. I didn't respond, but Sarah managed to enter regardless. Her face was marked by tears and paleness, as if she yearned to express one final plea to alter my decision. "Can we merely converse?" Whispering softly, she stood in the doorway, filled with doubt, as if realizing that words had run out. I looked at her, the woman I had shared a life with, the woman who used to be my love. Now she seemed like a stranger, someone whose choices were incomprehensible to me, someone who squandered everything we had built for a fleeting moment of self-indulgence. "What's left to discuss, Sarah?" I asked coolly. "Do you think more words can alter anything? Can we possibly revert to our former state? We've moved beyond that, way beyond it." She ventured into the room, her arms folded around herself, as if bracing herself. "I acknowledge the damage I've done," she said shakily, "but I don't want to lose you. I'll do whatever it takes to mend this. I'll break it off with him. I will." I interrupted, my voice edged. "There's nothing left to end, Sarah. I don't care about him. I don't care about your explanations. The instant you stepped into that motel room, you brought our relationship to an end." Her face contorted as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "Please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I love you. I acknowledge my grave error, but I still love you. We can mend this. I believe we can." I hesitated, nodding slowly, the sorrow in me intermingling with something more frigid. "You say you love me," I repeated softly. Yet I questioned that sentiment, as it seems like guilt rather than love, and such feelings won't suffice to repair what you've damaged. She fell onto the bed, hiding her face in her hands, her sobs increasing in volume. Yet I couldn't console her. I couldn't stretch out my hand towards her as I once did, because the fact was I no longer trusted her. Not after this. Not after what she had done. I rose from my seat, my mind already made up. "I am departing, Sarah," I said calmly. "I cannot remain here and feign that we can mend this. It's over." She looked at me, fear shining in her eyes. "Are you leaving? Where are you headed?" I was speechless, as I hadn't contemplated that far ahead. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in this house, living a life built on deceit. I needed to be somewhere other than here. "I haven't decided yet," I confessed, "but I'll find a way. I merely know I can't remain." She tried to grab me, her voice pleading. "Don't leave. Don't depart like this. We can seek counseling. We can work through it. I'll do whatever is necessary." I evaded her grasp, shaking my head. "No, this isn't something that can be resolved with therapy, Sarah. You overstepped a boundary, and there's no turning back from it. You made your decision, and now I'm making mine." The silence hung between us, oppressive and unendurable. For a fleeting moment, I almost yearned for the past, the times when things were straightforward, when we were content. But those times had passed, and clinging to them would only pull us deeper into despair. I retrieved a travel bag from the wardrobe, stuffing inside some necessities such as clothes, my laptop, along with items deemed useful for a short duration. Sarah stood nearby, her expression growing more melancholic with each object placed within. Each garment seemed to represent a fragment of our shared past, the remaining shards of our life together. Upon closing the bag and slinging it across my body, Sarah moved in front of me, barricading the door. "You can't simply depart," she said, her voice quivering. "I adore you. Why discard us like this?" I looked into her eyes, conscious of the weight behind her words, yet understanding that they were insufficient and overdue. "I'm not disposing anything, Sarah. You did that. I'm merely distancing myself from the debris." I bypassed her and exited the bedroom. The house seemed chillier and more desolate than ever before, but I refrained from looking back. I refused to falter. The front door locked behind me, marking a newfound sense of liberation, something unfelt in a prolonged period. As the door closed, I felt the burden gradually dissipate. It wasn't the anticipated wave of relief, but rather a tranquil void, akin to the calm after a tempest, with remnants of destruction all around, yet the storm itself having vanished. I slid into my car and remained motionless for a moment, fingers clenching the steering wheel, gazing at the quiet street. With no purpose or intended destination in mind, I was only aware that another second in that house was unbearable. The life constructed with Sarah had ended, leaving me to piece together something novel, devoid of her presence. For a while, I wandered aimlessly, the streets deserted at this late hour, my thoughts racing yet strangely devoid of feeling as I replayed every conversation and plea, yet none altered the stark reality of the situation. Unfixable rupture existed between us despite her attempts with apologies and tears. In approximately 20 minutes, I parked at a shabby motel lot, the irony escaping me given the start of the night. Regardless, I sought solace, not reflection. A temporary shelter was needed, free from the burden of that house. The motel, as run down as anticipated, with flickering fluorescent lights, thin walls, and a persistent smell of old smoke, didn't bother me. Cash paid for the room, registration complete, I navigated the dimly lit hallway. My footsteps reverberated off the walls. The room, as depressing as imagined, with cheap furnishings, an uncomfortable-looking bed, and a TV flickering without my intention to switch it on, was irrelevant. This wasn't home. Wasn't meant to be. It was merely an escape, a place to stay for the night without contemplating the future. I dumped my travel bag onto the bed and settled beside it, running fingers through my hair, attempting to pacify the turmoil within my mind. It was peculiar. For years, I hadn't been genuinely alone, no Sarah, no masking our discord. Just me, ensconced in a motel room, grappling with how my life had crumbled in a matter of hours. I retrieved my phone and stared at it, hesitant to dial anyone. Mark, my confidante, was likely asleep, and I wasn't certain I was prepared to divulge everything quite yet. I skimmed through my contacts, pausing over his name briefly before replacing the device. The fact was, I wasn't ready to discuss it. Not at this moment. Instead, I reclined on the bed, gazing at the ceiling, the quietness oppressive. My thoughts drifted back to the quarrel in our bedroom, how Sarah begged me to stay, to pardon her, to mend things. Yet, what she failed to grasp was that some matters cannot be mended. You can't simply repair a breach of trust like this and expect it to recover. Trust isn't something you can restore once it's been destroyed. I had given her years, my devotion, my faith, and she discarded it all for another, for whatever fleeting excitement or escape she believed she required. It wasn't merely the act of infidelity. It was the lies, the long periods of estrangement, the way she allowed our marriage to decay from within while maintaining a facade of normalcy. I shifted onto my side, feeling the motel bed groan under me, and attempted to close my eyes. But sleep eluded me. My mind persistently revisited the instant I saw her at the motel, how she looked at me, the fear in her eyes when she recognized she'd been found out. My mind echoed an endless loop of our past, unwilling to let go, tormenting me with memories. Once more, I reached for my phone, swiping through ancient photographs, images of me and Sarah in happier times, reminding me of our adventures, the snapshot on a hike being one of them, grinning at the camera, entwined in each other's arms, presenting an idealized version of ourselves. It was astonishing to think that those faces from the photograph were the same individuals who had viciously confronted each other just hours prior in that very room. A subdued daylight seeped through the flimsy motel curtains, casting a gentle pallor over everything. I stirred slowly, the tension in my neck serving as a painful reminder of this unfamiliar and uncomfortable sanctuary. With a brief moment's pause, the fog in my thoughts lifted, allowing me to recall where I was and why. The tumultuous events of last night resurfaced, accompanied by the familiar void in my chest. However, today it felt remote, detached. Sitting up, rubbing my eyes, I glanced at the phone on the nightstand beside me. Anticipating a flurry of unanswered calls and messages from Sarah, I found none instead. A part of me felt relieved, but another part pondered if she had given up or was merely waiting for my return. Yet, I had no intentions of going back. Recognizing the need to confide in someone, I decided to reach out to Mark. He'd faced his own hardships and was one of the few I trusted enough to share all this with. Reaching for my phone, I hesitantly scrolled to his name before dialing. After a brief wait, he picked up, his voice groggy yet filled with concern. "Hey, buddy, everything okay?" I struggled to find the right words, then admitted, "No, Mark. I left her. I'm currently at a motel." There was a silence, the kind that conveyed he was formulating a thoughtful reply. "What transpired?" he inquired softly, indicating that this was more than a trivial spat. "It appears she has been unfaithful to me," I retorted, my words tasting of bitterness and pain. "I discovered her last night at a motel with another man." Mark emitted a heavy sigh, the sound one makes when confronted with something far too huge and awful to truly comprehend. "I'm sorry, mate. I didn't foresee this. Neither did I. I had my doubts, but never expected it to unfold like this. It's been happening for months." Upon questioning her, she attempted to fabricate excuses. "The relationship is over. I've had enough." Mark was silent for a bit, then inquired, "Where are you currently?" "I am at a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, merely seeking solace away from home." The house became unbearable. "Would you like me to visit? We could have breakfast or something, discuss things." The prospect of his presence, someone who was not entangled in this whirlwind of emotions, felt like a lifeline. "Yes," I responded, feeling a slight sense of relief. Meeting at a nearby diner felt like the right decision as I prepared, realizing the weight of my predicament. I couldn't bear this alone any longer. The drive seemed interminable, symbolizing my departure from the shattered remnants of my life and entrance into the unknown. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was a beginning. Mark was already settled when I arrived, seated in a corner booth with 2 coffees waiting on the table. He greeted me warmly, his gaze reflecting sympathy and worry. As I sat down, he slid a cup towards me, anticipating my need. "All right," he began, leaning in, his fingers clasped around his mug. Share all the details. And so I did. I recounted the long silence, the rising distrust, the fabricated tales Sarah had spun. I spoke of locating her at the motel, of the argument that ensued, and her attempt to distort the truth even in her caught state. I set everything down, part by part, relieving myself of a burden I'd shouldered for far too long. Mark remained silent, occasionally nodding, his countenance somber. Upon concluding, he retreated, emitting a slow sigh. "Friend, I'm truly sorry for what she did, but I'm relieved you chose to depart. You can't recover from something like that." I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee. Indeed, I contemplated reconciling, but after last night, there's nothing left to mend. "So, what's your course of action now?" he inquired, genuinely interested. I hadn't given it much thought. I hadn't had the chance. "I haven't decided yet," I conceded. "Perhaps I'll have to return to the house at some point, determine my next move. Divorce, likely. Move out." The phrases seemed unfamiliar, as if they didn't belong to me just yet. Mark offered a compassionate gaze. If you require a temporary refuge, my couch is always available. You don't have to be in that house by yourself at the moment. The proposition was appealing, and I acknowledged its sincerity, but an inherent part within me yearned for solitary confrontation. I needed to return, to revisit the life I had abandoned, if merely to comprehend it all. "Thank you," I replied, mustering a faint grin. "I might accept your invitation, but not just yet." We chatted for an hour, discussing Sarah and much more beyond that. Life, work, trivial matters that seemed ordinary in a world now chaotic. In a peculiar way, our conversation provided comfort, assuring me that despite the collapse of my life, some aspects remained constant. Mark possessed a knack for simplifying things, reminding me this was not an ending, but merely a particularly agonizing phase. As we concluded breakfast and ventured into the crisp morning air, I came to a realization. I was not as isolated as I believed. I had friends. I had a life beyond my predicament with Sarah. And for the first time since last night, a glimmer of optimism stirred within me. Not wishing for a return to the past, but yearning for reconstruction. Perhaps, just perhaps, discovering myself anew amidst the ruins. "You'll persevere," Mark said, patting my shoulder as we parted ways. "You're stronger than you believe," I acknowledged, watching him leave, the sunrise ascending higher in the sky. And upon re-entering my vehicle, it struck me. He was correct. I didn't feel powerful at that moment. I didn't feel in control of my life, but I had taken the initial step. Sometimes, just taking that first step is enough. Thus, I sat in my car outside the diner for a while, observing the sunlight enlighten the surrounding world. It seemed like the first time I'd truly observed daybreak in months, though it had only been hours since I left the house. The sensation was peculiar, being on the brink of something new, uncertain of the next path. However, at least I was progressing. That was sufficient for now. I understood that lingering in indecision wasn't sustainable. Apart from handling the house and Sarah, there was a sense of tranquility instead of being overwhelmed by the decisions looming ahead. I didn't possess all the solutions, but for the first time, I wasn't fixated on the past. I was no longer pondering over what could have been done differently or how circumstances led to this state. The past was unalterable. I made up my mind to return to the house, not out of a desire to see her, but to regain control over my life. I needed to tackle the chaos in order to confront whatever remained. I wasn't the same person who had departed the previous night. That individual walked away with a heart laden with anger and betrayal, still clinging to the hope that things could change. However, now all I was ready for was to progress. The journey back seemed quicker than normal, as if my thoughts had accelerated into an upper gear, concentrating on the tasks at hand. The house appeared, no longer feeling like our home. It seemed a residence where two individuals dwelled, yet one held a desire to maintain it. Upon arriving in the driveway, I observed Sarah's vehicle still stationed outside. A piece of me yearned for her absence, but anticipation overpowered me, knowing she wouldn't vanish. She wasn't that type. Instead, she would linger, holding on to the dream of mending our relationship, unaware of the futility. As I exited my vehicle, the burden of what was to unfold weighed heavily upon me. Ascending the pathway, I inhaled deeply before entering. The house was filled with a palpable tension from the previous night. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her gaze fixated on her phone, yet she raised her eyes as soon as I entered. Her eyes were puffy, her complexion wan. "You returned," she whispered softly, her voice carrying both hope and fragility. For a moment, I remained silent, studying her, attempting to correlate the woman before me with the woman I had cherished for years. However, I couldn't find the connection. Too many events transpired. "I didn't return for us," I stated eventually, my voice firm yet chill. "I returned to wrap up matters." She glanced down, her hands quivering slightly. "I understand you're furious. I acknowledge my errors. But we could," I interjected, halting her before she wove any more illusions. "No," I declared, nipping her words short. "We can't. We've concluded, Sarah. Last night wasn't a mere mistake. It was the truth surfacing. You've been deceiving me for months. and whatever we shared, it's vanished. I cannot pardon that." Her eyes widened, grasping my words. Her mouth moved as if to speak, but she halted, seeming to realize there was no more ground to fight upon. I observed the agony in her eyes, yet felt no remorse. She had chosen her path. "What's next?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I settled opposite her, feeling an unusual tranquility. "We terminate this. I'll hire a lawyer. We'll divide the house, the funds, everything. She plans to depart once a suitable dwelling is found, avoiding prolonging the situation." A hint of anticipation was noticeable as she looked down and nodded slowly. "I suppose I suspected this would transpire," she whispered softly. "However, I didn't foresee it unfolding in this manner." I concurred, though privately, I had long suspected something amiss. What followed was a discussion of practicalities for the next hour, who would retain the residence, financial division, and the necessary steps to finalize the divorce. Sarah maintained her composure, yet the strain was evident. Occasionally, she'd gaze at me, her eyes brimming with remorse, as if yearning to utter words capable of mending everything. Yet, those words never came. Our conversation had run its course. Upon concluding, I stood up, prepared to depart. The previous night, I had already packed my essentials, and I saw no reason to linger in this house any longer than necessary. Grabbing my bag, Sarah rose, her eyes brimming with tears once more. "I apologize," she whispered, "for everything. I never intended to harm you." I studied her, feeling a peculiar detachment. The words held no weight now. They didn't alter anything. "I understand," I replied, my voice calm yet definitive. However, it was too late for that, and so I departed through the door, leaving the world we had constructed in the past. I wasn't certain where I was headed next. Perhaps to Mark's residence temporarily, maybe to a hotel until I discovered something more permanent. Yet, as I navigated away, an essential truth dawned upon me. I wasn't glancing back. For the first time, I wasn't preoccupied with contemplating what I could have done differently or how I could have salvaged our union. Instead, I pondered the future, the rebuilding process. The unknown was intimidating, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't frighten me. It felt like liberation. The home, the memories, the deceit, they were all fading into the rearview mirror now. Continued onward, steadfastly propelling my vehicle, devoid of pause or retreat. That's what I accomplished. The photo, once cherished, vanished, followed by more like it. Each image became a memento of an illusion, a shimmering mirage of a connection that was never truly established. As I swiped through the digital remnants of our past, I increasingly recognized the considerable portion of my life I had committed to someone who wasn't the individual I believed her to be. Eventually, I laid my phone aside for good and gazed at the ceiling, surrendering to the tranquility that ensued. No turning back was possible. The reality had sunk in. No words or vows could undo what had transpired. Sarah had made her decision, and now it was mine. This was the inaugural night of my solitary existence. Yet, perhaps this wasn't entirely a misfortune. Perhaps, after all that had passed, it was high time to rediscover who I truly am without her. To recover the fragments of myself that I had lost in the pursuit of something that had ceased to exist long ago. In the midst of an uneasy slumber, a single thought persistently echoed within me. It's concluded. This time, fear was not present as I contemplated its implications.